The year was 2347, and humanity had finally reached the stars. After centuries of dreaming and decades of struggle, human beings had built ships that could travel faster than light. They had established small colonies on 3 nearby star systems. They had met other intelligent species and learned they were not alone in the universe. But they had also learned something else. They were the youngest species in the galaxy. They were the weakest. And according to the ancient empires that ruled the stars, they were a problem that needed to be solved. Ambassador Daniel Perry stood in the Great Hall of the United Earth Assembly in Geneva. The building was old, built in a time when humans still fought wars against each other. Now it served as the meeting place for representatives from every nation on Earth and every human colony in space. Daniel was 53 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent his entire career trying to build bridges between humanity and the alien civilizations they had encountered. Today, all that work would mean nothing. The holographic projectors in the center of the hall flickered to life. A massive image appeared above the assembly floor. It showed a creature that looked like a tall lizard standing on 2 legs. His scales were dark green, and his eyes were cold yellow. He wore robes of deep purple, decorated with golden symbols that represented his authority. This was High Counselor Vexarn of the Drathari Empire, the leader of the Galactic Council. The Galactic Council was a governing body made up of 12 ancient spacefaring civilizations. Some of these species had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. They had built empires that spanned thousands of worlds. They had technology that seemed like magic, and they had decided, after watching humanity for nearly a century, that the young species from Earth was too dangerous to be allowed to grow. Vexarn spoke in a voice that was translated instantly by the Assembly's computer systems. His words were calm and cold, like a judge reading a sentence. Species designation human, origin planet Earth. You have been evaluated by the Galactic Council. Your rapid technological advancement and unpredictable nature have been deemed a threat to galactic stability. You are hereby ordered to surrender unconditionally within 30 standard cycles. You will dismantle your military fleet. You will accept permanent observation status as a subordinate species. Your expansion beyond your home system will cease immediately. He paused, letting the words sink in. Around the assembly hall, world leaders sat in shocked silence. Some clutched the arms of their chairs, others stared at the hologram with wide eyes. A few quietly wept. Vexarn continued. Failure to comply will result in the complete sterilization of your homeworld and all human colonies. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is your only warning. The hologram flickered and disappeared. The hall was silent for a long moment. Then the whispers began. Delegates turned to each other with fear on their faces. Some reached for their communication devices to call military advisors or family members. The weight of what they had just heard pressed down on everyone in the room. Daniel Perry felt his heart pounding in his chest. He had studied the Galactic Council for years. He knew their history. He knew that when they made threats, they followed through. Dozens of species had received ultimatums like this one. None of them had survived defiance. The Council had the power to burn entire worlds to ash. Against them, humanity had a fleet of 3,000 ships and technology that was thousands of years behind. By every logical measure, surrender was the only option. But then something happened that no one expected. Secretary General Katie Morrison stood up from her seat at the center of the assembly. She was 61 years old, a former school teacher who had entered politics late in life. She had white hair pulled back in a simple style, and she wore a plain gray suit. She was not a warrior or a general. She was just a woman who had spent her life believing that every problem had a solution. She looked at the empty space where Vexarn's hologram had been, and she began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle, barely audible. Then it grew louder. Her shoulders shook. Tears formed in the corners of her eyes. It was not a nervous laugh or a crazy laugh. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from deep inside when something is truly funny. The delegates stared at her in confusion. Some thought she had lost her mind. But then the Prime Minister of Canada, a man named Douglas Finch, began to smile. He shook his head slowly, and then he started laughing too. Within seconds, the laughter spread. The President of Brazil, the Chancellor of Germany, the representatives from the Moon colonies and the Mars settlements. One by one, they joined in until the entire assembly hall was filled with the sound of human laughter. Far away, aboard a monitoring station at the edge of human space, a Galactic Council observation team watched the transmission with growing confusion. They had witnessed this scene play out hundreds of times with other species. They had seen terror. They had seen despair. They had seen leaders begging for mercy or turning on each other in panic. They had never seen anything like this. The senior observer, a member of the Velnari species, turned to his colleague. "What are they doing? Do they not understand the threat?" His colleague, a Korwani with pale blue skin, shook her head slowly. "They understand. That is what concerns me." Back in Geneva, Katie Morrison wiped the tears from her eyes and raised her hand for silence. The laughter slowly faded, but the smiles remained. She looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. She saw fear there, yes. But she also saw something else, something that the Galactic Council had never encountered in all their long history of conquest. She saw defiance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and calm, "I believe we have our answer for the Council. Please inform High Counselor Vexarn that humanity respectfully declines his generous offer. And tell him that if he wants Earth, he is welcome to come and try to take it." The assembly erupted in cheers. Around the world, people watched the broadcast and felt something stir in their hearts. They did not know if they could win the coming war. They did not know if any of them would survive. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty: they would not kneel. And somewhere in the cold depths of space, the Galactic Council began to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. They had threatened a species that did not know how to surrender, a species that had faced extinction dozens of times and always found a way to survive, a species that laughed in the face of death. They had threatened humanity, and humanity was not afraid. Admiral Nathan Cole received his orders 6 hours after the Assembly's vote. He was 58 years old, a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that had seen too many battles. He had joined the United Earth Navy when he was 18, back when the biggest threats were pirates and rogue colonies. Now he commanded humanity's entire defense fleet, and he was being asked to do the impossible. The meeting took place in a bunker buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The walls were thick concrete and steel, designed to survive a nuclear attack. Now they would have to survive something much worse. Nathan sat at the head of a long table, flanked by General Laura Bishop of the Ground Defense Forces and Director Chris Palmer of Earth Intelligence. Laura was a small woman with sharp eyes and short black hair. She had grown up in poverty on the streets of Chicago and had clawed her way up through the military ranks through sheer determination. Chris was the opposite, a quiet man with glasses and a soft voice who looked more like a librarian than a spy. Together, the three of them were responsible for humanity's survival. Nathan spread his hands on the table and looked at his colleagues. "Give me the numbers." Chris opened a holographic display that showed the known composition of the Galactic Council's forces. The numbers were terrifying. The Council commanded a combined fleet of over 2 million warships. The smallest of these vessels was twice the size of humanity's largest battleship. Their weapons could destroy planets. Their shields could withstand anything humanity could throw at them. "We have 3,200 ships," Chris said quietly. "Most of them are light cruisers and patrol vessels. We have exactly 47 ships that could be classified as battleships, and even those are toys compared to what the Council has. Laura shook her head. So we are outnumbered 600 to 1 and outgunned by a factor of who knows how much. Please tell me you have some good news. Chris allowed himself a small smile. Actually, I do. The Council species have not fought a real war in over 40,000 years. Their military exists mostly for show. Their tactics are ceremonial. They expect enemies to follow rules that were established before humans discovered fire. They have never faced an opponent who was willing to die rather than follow those rules. Nathan leaned forward. What are you saying? I am saying that they have forgotten what war really is. They think of it as a game with polite rules and predictable outcomes. They have no idea what happens when they face an enemy that fights dirty, that refuses to surrender, that treats every battle like it might be their last. Laura nodded slowly. So we cannot beat them in a straight fight. But we can make them bleed. We can make the cost of victory so high that they might reconsider. That is the plan, Nathan agreed. But we need more than just determination. We need something that can level the playing field, even if just a little. As if on cue, the door to the bunker opened and a young man walked in. He was thin and pale, with messy brown hair and clothes that looked like he had slept in them for a week. This was Dr. Kevin Shaw, the brightest physicist in human history. He was 32 years old and had already won every scientific award that existed. Now he was working on something that could change everything. Kevin dropped a tablet on the table and collapsed into a chair. I think I have something. He explained his discovery in simple terms. Human faster-than-light drives worked on different principles than Council technology. The Council used stable wormholes that required enormous amounts of energy and infrastructure. Humans used a cruder method that bent space-time in unpredictable ways. For years, this had been seen as a weakness, but Kevin had realized it could be turned into a weapon. If we modify our drives and synchronize them correctly, we can create a field that disrupts all technology around it. Navigation systems fail, communications scramble, engines produce random results. The effect only lasts for a few minutes, but in those few minutes their ships will be blind and helpless. Nathan stared at him. You are telling me we can build a device that turns their entire fleet into sitting ducks? For a short time, yes, but there is a catch. The field affects us too. We will need ships that can fight without relying on computers. Manual controls, simple weapons, pilots who can fly by instinct instead of instruments. Laura laughed. So we need to go back to fighting like our ancestors did. Iron sights and gut feelings. Exactly. The plan began to take shape. The Navy would be reorganized. New ships would be built with backup manual systems. Pilots would be trained in techniques that had not been used in centuries. And Kevin's device would be constructed in secret, hidden until the moment it was needed most. While the military prepared, Secretary General Katie Morrison addressed the world. Her broadcast reached every human being alive, from the crowded cities of Earth to the small mining outposts on distant moons. She stood in front of a simple blue background, wearing the same plain gray suit she had worn in the assembly hall. She did not read from a script. She spoke from the heart. My fellow humans, she began. You have heard the Council's demands. You know what they threaten to do if we refuse. I will not lie to you. The odds are against us. By every calculation, we should not be able to win this fight, but I want you to remember something. Our ancestors faced impossible odds too. They survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years. They survived plagues that killed half the population. They survived wars and famines and disasters that should have wiped them out. They survived because they refused to give up. They survived because they believed that tomorrow could be better than today. That is who we are. That is what it means to be human. She paused and looked directly into the camera. I am not asking you to die. I am asking you to fight, to work, to build, to hope. Whatever happens in the coming days, we will face it together. And if we must fall, we will fall standing on our feet, not kneeling on our knees." The response was immediate. Across Earth, volunteers flooded military recruitment centers. Factories that had been making consumer goods switched to producing weapons and ships. Scientists abandoned sleep to develop new technologies. Engineers worked double shifts to build Kevin's devices. Teachers explained to their students why their parents might not come home. Children drew pictures of human ships fighting alien monsters and hung them in their windows. On Mars, a retired pilot named Hannah Cruz dusted off her old flight suit and reported for duty. She was 67 years old and had not flown in 20 years. When they told her she was too old, she laughed and said she would rather die in a cockpit than in a hospital bed. On the Moon, a group of miners volunteered to hollow out asteroids and turn them into hidden bases. It was dangerous work. 3 of them died in the first week. The others kept working. On Earth, a young man named Greg Martinez walked into a recruitment office in Houston. He was 24 years old and had never done anything remarkable in his life. He worked at a grocery store and spent his weekends playing video games. But when he heard the Secretary General's speech, something inside him changed. He did not want to be remarkable. He just wanted to help. Humanity prepared for war, and they did it with smiles on their faces because they knew a secret that the Galactic Council had never learned. Hope was not something you found, it was something you chose, and humanity had made its choice. The Council Armada arrived at the edge of the Sol system on the 31st cycle, exactly 1 day after their deadline had passed. Fleet Commander Toraxis of the Velnari Hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Judgment, and surveyed the darkness of space before him. He was ancient by human standards, over 400 years old, and he had commanded more fleets than he could remember. But he had never commanded one this large. 50,000 warships stretched behind him in perfect formation. Each vessel was a masterpiece of engineering, built with technology that humans could barely understand. The smallest ships were heavy cruisers that could level cities. The largest were dreadnoughts that could crack continents. Toraxis had brought enough firepower to destroy Earth 100 times over. He expected the battle to last no more than a few hours. His sensors swept the system, but found nothing. No defensive fleet, no warning beacons, no communications of any kind. Earth's pathetic navy was nowhere to be seen. The only thing they detected was a single automated beacon floating in space near the orbit of Neptune. It broadcast a simple message in the Council common tongue, repeating over and over again. "Welcome to human space. We hope you brought enough ships." Toraxis made a sound that was the Velnari equivalent of laughter. "Foolish creatures. They think their words will frighten us." He turned to his second in command. "Signal the fleet. We advance in standard formation. Sterilization protocols for Earth. No survivors." The Armada began to move inward, toward the small blue planet that had dared to defy the Council. They passed the orbit of Neptune without incident. Then Uranus, then Saturn. Toraxis grew more confident with each passing hour. The humans had run. They had hidden. Their brave words had been nothing but empty noise. He began composing his victory report in his head. Then his sensors officer made a strange sound. "Commander, I am detecting anomalies in the asteroid belt." Toraxis looked at the display. The asteroid belt was a ring of rocks and debris that circled the sun between Mars and Jupiter. It was unremarkable. Just cosmic rubble left over from the formation of the solar system. But now something was moving inside it. "Magnify!" Toraxis ordered. The image zoomed in, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Dozens of asteroids were splitting open like eggs. From inside each one emerged human ships, painted black to blend with the darkness of space. They were small, barely larger than fighters compared to his cruisers. But there were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, and they were moving with a speed that should have been impossible. Commander Scott Jennings sat in the cockpit of his fighter and felt his heart racing. He was 41 years old, a career pilot who had spent most of his life running patrols and escort missions. He had never been in a real battle. None of them had, but that was about to change. "All wings, this is Jennings," he said into his radio. "Remember your training. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and do not stop moving. We are not here to win. We are here to hurt them." His squad consisted of 200 fighters hidden in hollowed-out asteroids. They had been waiting in silence for 3 days, with engines cold and life support barely running, eating ration bars and trying not to think about what was coming. Now the waiting was over. The human ships did not attack in the way Toraxis expected. Council doctrine called for formal engagement protocols. Ships would line up in formation, exchange identification codes, and begin combat at an agreed-upon distance. There were rules about which targets were acceptable and which were protected. War, in the Council's view, was a civilized affair. The humans did not care about rules. Jennings led his wing straight into the heart of the enemy formation. They did not target the warships. They targeted the support vessels, the fuel tankers, the repair ships, the communication relays, the targets that Council doctrine said were off-limits. The first human missiles found their marks before the Council ships even realized they were under attack. 3 fuel tankers exploded in balls of fire. A communication ship lost its antenna array. A repair vessel took a hit to its engine and began spinning out of control. Toraxis roared in fury. "This is against all conventions! They cannot attack supply ships!" His aide looked at him with confusion. "Commander, they are attacking everything." The battle became chaos. Human pilots flew with reckless abandon, weaving between Council ships and striking wherever they saw weakness. They took terrible losses. For every Council ship they damaged, they lost 10 of their own. But they did not retreat. They did not surrender. They kept coming, wave after wave, as if death meant nothing to them. In the command bunker on Earth, Admiral Nathan Cole watched the battle unfold on a holographic display. Each blue dot represented a human ship. Each red dot represented an enemy. The blue dots were disappearing faster than he could count, but the red dots were disappearing too. Not many, but some. It was more than anyone had expected. "How long can they hold?" General Laura Bishop asked. "Not long enough," Nathan admitted. "But that was never the plan. They just need to buy us time." Somewhere in the chaos of the asteroid belt, Commander Jennings felt his ship shudder as an enemy beam clipped his wing. Warning lights flashed across his console. His shields were gone. His weapons were nearly depleted. Half his squadron was dead. But ahead of him, he could see a Council communication relay, still broadcasting orders to the fleet. He did not hesitate. He pushed his engines to maximum and aimed his ship directly at the relay. "Jennings, what are you doing?" his wingman screamed over the radio. "Finishing my job," Jennings replied calmly. "Tell my wife I love her." His ship struck the relay at full speed. The explosion was small by the standards of space combat, but it was enough. The relay shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The Council fleet lost contact with 3 entire squadrons. News of Jennings's sacrifice spread through the human fleet instantly. Instead of demoralizing them, it made them fight harder. Other pilots began making similar choices, ramming their crippled ships into enemy targets rather than retreating. Toraxis watched his display with growing horror. He had lost nearly 8,000 ships. The humans had lost far more, but they would not stop fighting. Every time he thought they were broken, they came back. Every time he thought they would surrender, they attacked again. "What kind of creatures are these?" he whispered. His aide had no answer. The battle raged for 6 hours before the human forces finally ran out of ships. The survivors retreated toward Mars, leaving behind a debris field that stretched for millions of kilometers. Toraxis had won, but it did not feel like victory. He had expected to crush the humans without effort. Instead, he had lost 8,000 ships and countless soldiers. And he had not even reached Earth yet. As his fleet regrouped and continued inward, a message arrived from Earth. It was simple, just a few words transmitted on all frequencies. "Thank you for the warm-up. The real fight starts now." Taraxis stared at the message for a long time. For the first time in his 400 years of life, he felt something he did not recognize. It was fear. Fleet Commander Taraxis reached Earth orbit with 42,000 ships. He had lost 8,000 in the asteroid belt, a number that would have been considered a catastrophe in any previous Council military operation. But he still had more than enough firepower to complete his mission. He positioned his fleet in a wide formation around the planet and prepared to issue the final surrender demand. Earth hung below him, a small blue marble wrapped in white clouds. From space it looked peaceful, almost fragile. It was hard to believe that such a small world had caused so much trouble. Taraxis felt a moment of something that might have been regret. In a different universe, perhaps humans could have been allies instead of enemies. But that universe did not exist. The Council had made its decision, and Taraxis would carry it out. He opened a channel to broadcast his message. "Attention, species human. This is Fleet Commander Taraxis of the Galactic Council Armada. Your defense forces have been destroyed. You have no remaining military capability. Surrender immediately, and your civilian population will be spared. Resist, and you will be—" His words stopped as every alarm on his ship began screaming at once. Around the planet, hidden among the satellites and space stations that humans used for communication and research, 12 orbital platforms activated simultaneously. They were not weapons in any form that Taraxis recognized. They were Dr. Kevin Shaw's devices, scaled up and linked together in a network that surrounded the entire planet. The platforms generated a space-time distortion field that expanded outward at the speed of light. When it hit the Council fleet, everything went wrong at once. Navigation systems began showing impossible readings. Ships that were holding steady position suddenly found themselves drifting in random directions. Communication channels filled with static. Engines fired without commands or refused to respond to commands that were given. Weapon systems locked up or targeted the wrong ships. Taraxis grabbed his command chair as his flagship lurched sideways. "What is happening? Report!" His officers scrambled at their stations, but nothing worked. Screens flickered with garbage data. Control surfaces did not respond. The perfect formation of the Council fleet dissolved into chaos as thousands of ships began drifting and spinning out of control. And then the humans attacked. They came from everywhere, from the surface of Earth itself, from hidden stations on the moon, from cargo ships that had been disguised as civilian transports. Thousands of vessels, more than the Council had believed humanity possessed, surged upward into the chaos. Most of these ships were not military. They were converted civilian vessels, retrofitted with whatever weapons could be attached in the 6 weeks since the ultimatum. Cargo haulers with missile launchers bolted to their hulls. Mining ships with their drilling lasers rewired for combat. Passenger liners with their luxury cabins stripped out and replaced with gun emplacements. And they were crewed by volunteers, ordinary people who had never trained for war. Teachers and farmers and factory workers and students, people who had everything to lose and nothing to gain except the knowledge that they had not given up without a fight. Captain Amy Hartwell stood on the bridge of the Starlight Dream, a cruise liner that had once carried tourists on luxury voyages to the moon. Now it carried 300 crew members and enough weapons to fight a small war. Amy was 35 years old, and 6 weeks ago she had been a hospitality manager whose biggest concern was making sure guests were satisfied with their room service. Now she was leading her ship into battle against an alien empire. "All guns, fire at will," she ordered. Her voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. "Target anything that looks important. And remember, If your systems go down, switch to manual. We trained for this." The Starlight Dream's weapons were crude compared to Council technology, but in the chaos of the distortion field, crude had its advantages. Human weapons used simple targeting systems that could work without computers. They fired projectiles and missiles that did not rely on sophisticated guidance, and the people using them had spent weeks practicing how to aim and fire using nothing but their eyes and their instincts. The battle was brutal and ugly, and nothing like the elegant engagements described in Council military academies. Human ships rammed into Council vessels. Boarding parties cut through airlocks with welding torches and fought hand-to-hand in corridors designed for species 3 times their size. Pilots flew patterns that no computer would ever recommend, trusting their gut feelings over any kind of logic. Greg Martinez, the young man from Houston who had volunteered at a recruitment office after hearing the Secretary General's speech, found himself flying a shuttle packed with explosives. His mission was simple: get close to a Council flagship and detonate. It was a suicide mission, and he had volunteered for it. He was not special. He was not a hero. He was just a grocery store worker who had decided that his life was worth trading for the chance to protect his planet. His shuttle weaved through the chaos, dodging debris and weapons fire. Council ships tried to target him, but their systems were still scrambled. He got closer and closer to his target, a massive dreadnought that was Toraxis's flagship. In the final moments, Greg thought about his mother, who had cried when he told her he was enlisting. He thought about his friends, who had called him crazy. He thought about all the things he would never get to do, all the experiences he would never have. And then he thought about the children on Earth who might grow up free because of what he was about to do. He smiled and pushed his engines to maximum. His shuttle struck the flagship's bridge at full speed. The explosion was massive, tearing through the command center and killing everyone inside, including Fleet Commander Toraxis. The dreadnought, suddenly without leadership, began to drift aimlessly. Around the battlefield, other human pilots were making similar choices. When their ships were crippled, they did not eject. They aimed for enemy targets and kept flying. When they ran out of ammunition, they used their ships as weapons. They fought with a ferocity that the Council had never seen before, a willingness to sacrifice that defied every model and prediction. Admiral Nathan Cole watched from his command bunker as the tide of battle turned. The Council fleet was in complete disarray. Ships were fleeing in random directions, trying to escape the distortion field. Others were surrendering, broadcasting signals of defeat that no one had ever expected to hear from Council vessels. "How many have we lost?" he asked quietly. "Over 2,000 ships," his aide replied. "Maybe 60% of everyone we sent up." Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. 60%. Thousands of people, volunteers who had known they might not come back. And them? 28,000 ships destroyed or disabled. Their command structure is completely broken. Nathan opened his eyes and looked at the display. The blue dots had thinned dramatically, but the red dots had thinned even more. Against all odds, against every prediction and calculation, humanity had won. Not just won. They had shattered the greatest military force in the galaxy. General Laura Bishop put her hand on his shoulder. "What do we do now?" Nathan thought about it for a long moment. The Council would not give up after one defeat. They would regroup. They would build more ships. They would come back with even greater force. But not today. Today, humanity had proved something that the galaxy had never seen before. They had proved that numbers and technology were not everything. They had proved that will and courage and the willingness to sacrifice could overcome impossible odds. "Now," Nathan said slowly, "we send them a message. We tell them that this was just the beginning. We tell them that if they want to try again, we will be waiting. And we tell them that the next time, we will not just defend, we will come for them." He paused and allowed himself a small smile. and we tell them that humanity is still laughing. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 3 days after the battle for Earth. The Great Chamber on the Council homeworld, a place that had witnessed 40,000 years of calm deliberation, erupted into chaos. Representatives from 12 ancient species shouted at each other across the floor, their translators struggling to keep up with the accusations and demands. High Counselor Vexarn stood at the center of the storm, his scales flushed dark with anger and shame. He had ordered the invasion. He had promised a quick victory. Now Fleet Commander Toraxis was dead. 28,000 ships were destroyed, and the entire galaxy was watching to see what the Council would do next. "We must send another fleet," demanded the representative from the Thraxian Consortium. "A larger one. We must show these primitives that resistance is futile." "With what ships?" replied the Korwani ambassador, a pale blue female named Seleth. "We lost a third of our combined military in a single battle. The humans have shown they are willing to die rather than surrender. How many more ships are you willing to sacrifice?" The arguments continued for hours. Some species demanded immediate retaliation. Others urged caution. A few quietly suggested that perhaps the Council had made a terrible mistake. In the end, no decision was reached. The Council was paralyzed, unable to agree on a course of action. For the first time in its long history, the most powerful governing body in the galaxy did not know what to do. While the Council argued, Secretary General Katie Morrison sent a message. It was not a demand for reparations. It was not a threat of further violence, it was an invitation. She invited the Council to send a single representative to Earth, not to negotiate terms, but to understand, to see what the humans were, to learn why they had laughed. High Counselor Vexarn refused immediately. He called the invitation a trap, a trick designed to embarrass the Council further. Most of the other species agreed with him, but Ambassador Seleth did not. She was young by Council standards, only 200 years old, and she represented the youngest species in the Council. The Korwani had joined the Council only 3,000 years ago, and they still remembered what it was like to be small and weak and afraid. She looked at the humans and saw something familiar. Against the direct orders of her government, she boarded a ship and traveled to Earth alone. The journey took 2 weeks. When she arrived, she expected to find a planet preparing for war, factories producing weapons, soldiers training for battle, a civilization consumed by fear and hatred. What she found was something else entirely. She found children playing in parks. She found artists painting murals on walls damaged by the battle. She found engineers rebuilding the orbital platforms that had saved their planet. She found farmers planting crops and teachers holding classes and families eating dinner together. She found life going on. Ambassador Daniel Perry met her when she landed in Geneva. He was the same man who had stood in the assembly hall when Vexarn's ultimatum arrived. He looked older now, with more gray in his hair and deeper lines around his eyes. But he smiled when he saw her. A genuine smile that held no trace of hatred or revenge. "Welcome to Earth," he said. "I imagine you have questions." She had many questions. Over the following days, Daniel showed her his world. He took her to hospitals where doctors were treating wounded soldiers. He took her to memorials where families were mourning the dead. He took her to schools where children were learning about the species that had tried to destroy them. Everywhere she went, she expected to find anger. Instead, she found something she did not have a word for in her own language. She found hope. In a small cafe in Paris, she finally asked the question that had been burning inside her since she arrived. "Why did you laugh? When Vexarn delivered his ultimatum, why did your Secretary General laugh?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He stirred his coffee and looked out the window at the people walking by on the street below. "Because we recognize the situation," he said finally. "Humanity has faced extinction more times than I can count. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years, plagues that killed half our population, wars that burned entire continents. Every time someone told us it was hopeless, every time someone said we should give up, and every time we refused. We laughed because we knew we had been here before. We laughed because giving up was never an option. We laughed because hope is not something you find. It is something you choose. Seleth thought about his words for a long time. She thought about her own species, the Korwani, who had surrendered to the Council 3,000 years ago because they believed they had no choice. They had survived, yes. But they had lost something in the process. They had lost the belief that they could shape their own future. She made her decision. When she returned to the Council homeworld, she presented her report. She did not describe humanity as a threat or an enemy. She described them as something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that refused to accept limits. A species that believed tomorrow could always be better than today. A species that the Council could destroy, perhaps, but never defeat. She recommended that humanity be offered full membership in the Galactic Council, not as a subordinate species, but as an equal. The Council argued for months. In the end, they had no choice. Humanity had proven they could not be conquered. The only option was to embrace them. The treaty was signed 1 year after the battle for Earth, in the same assembly hall in Geneva where everything had begun. High Counselor Vexarn was forced to attend, to shake hands with Secretary General Katie Morrison, to formally welcome humanity into the community of galactic civilizations. A reporter asked Morrison what this moment meant for humanity. She smiled, the same smile she had worn when she laughed at Vexarn's ultimatum. It means we get to keep laughing. 100 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways no one had predicted. Human scientists collaborated with Council researchers to cure diseases that had plagued ancient species for millennia. Human engineers designed ships that could travel faster and farther than ever before. Human artists created works that moved beings who had believed themselves beyond emotion. Human philosophers asked questions that challenged assumptions older than most civilizations, but the greatest change was invisible. The other species learned something from humanity. They learned to hope, to dream, to believe that impossible things could be achieved through will and courage, and the refusal to accept defeat. On Earth, a monument stood in Geneva. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone covered with names. Every human who had died in the battle for Earth was listed there. Soldiers and civilians, pilots and engineers, young and old, famous and forgotten. At the base of the monument, an inscription read, "They laughed because they knew something the Council did not, that humanity's greatest weapon was never our ships or our technology. It was our refusal to stop believing in tomorrow." Admiral Nathan Cole visited the monument every year on the anniversary of the battle. He was old now, 158 years old, kept alive by medical technology that had not existed when he was young. He walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but he still came every year without fail. He placed flowers at the base of the monument. He read the names of friends he had lost. He remembered Greg Martinez, the grocery store worker who had saved humanity by flying a shuttle into an enemy flagship. He remembered Scott Jennings, who had sacrificed himself in the asteroid belt. He remembered all the ordinary people who had become extraordinary when it mattered most. And sometimes, when no one was watching, he laughed, because the joke was still funny. The galaxy had thought they could break humanity. They had thought that threats and overwhelming force would make humans kneel. They were wrong. They had always been wrong. And now, 100 years later, humanity was still standing, still dreaming, still building a future that no one had thought possible, still laughing, because that was what it meant to be human, to face the darkness with a smile, to answer despair with hope, to look at the impossible and say, We will find a way. The stars belonged to everyone now, but humanity had earned their place among them, not through conquest or destruction, but through the simple, stubborn belief that tomorrow would be better than today. And somewhere in the universe, wherever beings gathered to tell stories of courage and hope, they told the story of the small, blue planet that had laughed at the end of the world. They told the story of humanity,